Hello, hello. Thank you everybody for being here today. Today we're so fortunate to get to speak with Shannon Knight, author of the thrilling story Domestication, which just the cover itself is fantastic, let alone once you dig into it. And I have to say, this ended up being one of the longer stories we featured with YPQ, but I probably read it in two sittings, one of the fastest times I've read a story for YPQ. It really was so gripping from the beginning through the end. And I think, at least for me, what stuck out was a lot of the dialogue and the relationships between characters. You wrote something that, at its moments, had some absurdity to it, but still felt so real and linked back to, I don't know, it really stuck with me. So hats off to you. You wrote a fantastic story. We're so grateful to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you.
I wrote in my notes, I was thinking of what to compare it to. I always like to try and think of like a good way to pitch it to someone. And what I came up with was George Orwell's Animal Farm meets The Hills Have Eyes. And I had your books on my TBR for a while anyway, Shannon. So I think ages ago, his first chapter kind of threads I found Grave Cold,
Oh, yeah,
and
yeah.
that had sat on there for a while. And then Insiders I found as well. I think that might have been during one of the sales, but I definitely read, or it might have been Spiffbo, the competition, or maybe one of them. But I remember reading the introduction to Insiders and putting that on my sci-fi TBR list. Really liked the intro to that as well. So when I saw the cover of Domestication, I went, "Oh, I like that. That looks good. That looks horrible, like in a good way." And I think what I wanted to, because I've got so many things to ask and to talk about, but the first thing that I wanted to ask was about the cover, since it's the
Mm.
first thing that people see. Tell us a little bit about the cover and how that all came together.
Savannah Mayer is the mastermind behind this. And for all of my books, I've done some pieces, either interviews or other written pieces on how the cover was created. And I've got links to all of that on my website. So if you want to read up about it
Nice.
from Savannah, you can. What I did was first I did the big hunt for the artist, skipping that,
Mm-hmm.
reaching out to Savannah, who had the coolest Gideon the Ninth picture up. That was how I first found them. With like all of these bones. And so I was like, so I got this book, bones, 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 want something abstract on the cover. One of the reasons Savannah stood out to me also is that they live on a farm, and I wanted a farm element, but abstract was the big one. So I gave this little breakdown of the plot. I'm like, not cannibalism and some other things like that. And they were like, I'm in. So they created several different like thumbnail designs. Each one they they were awesome. They were really good. And some of them I thought like you're promising maybe more than I'm delivering with some of these like amazing um pictures, which again you can see them because I've got them. I think I'm not even sure which one they're on because I put multiple pieces out with that. But this was the one that we went into and even had multiple iterations of it because at first what I wanted was red bones. And the red bone
Yeah.
version looked it was rad. But when it was brought down to thumbnail, it didn't look so much like bones. And I thought, well, so many people see the cover for the first time in a thumbnail. So we did a switch over and here you see the end product. And so then I show it to people and they're like, ew. And it's kind
Yeah.
of
I've
not
experienced
not the
that.
usual cover reaction.
But I think within that,
Definitely one that stays with people though, this isn't it? Like it's what attracted me to the cover initially. I went, "Oh God, what's that?" But I
I think
love that. I
it,
love as Ryan will tell you, I love a really weird, freaky, horrible book. I'm always the one that's bringing in really wild stuff. Ryan's had to turn down several things that are just like corrosive to the touch that I want to suggest. Definitely one of the darker books that we've featured as well. When we were initially reading it through, obviously we try and make the books that we send out kind of accessible. And from the off, we thought, well, it's going to be about cannibalism and stuff. Like I think I pegged early on. I was like, oh, they're eating people. They're
Yeah,
definitely eating people.
I caught that pretty quick as well.
I mean, it's practically on the back, like
Yeah.
heads up.
But
But
I
what I
think,
loved was that there was a part in the book. I think it's just at part 2, where, by the way, spoilers from the off. If you've not read Domestication, go and read it. It's a phenomenal book. I read it in like 2 days. It goes down easy, even if it's a bit like you might feel a bit nauseous at times. But the part where it cuts to part 2, like into the fire, and I was like, oh, it's not about, she's not going to find out they're eating people, and then it's like a slasher movie. It's way worse than that.
well, I think it's from my perspective, it feels like although it's a story about cannibalism and you have such unique, for lack of a better word, food chain dynamics within the relationships of the people as well. Uh, you
Well put.
very like coming back to accessibility, if we were gonna feature a story about cannibalism, this is about as accessible as it's going to be. I couldn't imagine it going in another direction or this or that, you know?
I mean, because honestly, it's not really about cannibalism.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Because
yeah,
I know when
Just
we
happens to have a
spoke,
little on the side.
because I know when we spoke,
yeah. I love that. It's got cannibalism in it. I think it's much more about, if I had to pick like a central theme, I think the title does it perfectly. It's about the domestication, whether that's of animals or of people, the way that it happens in the context of domestic violence, controlling behavior, that kind of thing, or whether it's on a farm, the way that you break a dog, break a sheep, those kind of things. And I kind of want to start at the base because I'm going to build on this and ask weirder and weirder questions as we go. But I know from the end where the acknowledgements are that you worked on a sheep farm, uh, that you went skeet shooting and stuff. I liked all the stuff about, like, I'm from the countryside in Scotland, so I'm very familiar with farms and shotguns, and it always annoys me when they work wrong in a book, where I'm like, that's not how that works. So you get a little medal pinned on for getting everything perfectly accurate. Tell me a little bit about living on a sheep farm. And I know it was like long COVID and your experience with that as well, right? That fed a lot into this. Tell us a little bit about the genesis of this idea, like where it came from.
Genesis of the idea. Okay. So what I do, there's this meme with some like crazy looking guy in the pin board and all the, yeah, that's me with all of my books. So I want to do this thing and this other thing and then like three other things and want them all together. And that is the genesis. So with this one, I had long COVID. I still have long COVID, but I'm talking and I'm sitting up and stuff like that. And it was horrifying, and I wanted to write about it, but I did not want to write about it. And so what I wanted was that parallel that I could write about instead, that, was saying the thing. And one of the huge parts of becoming incredibly disabled is, of course, ableism. And so much of that is built around the idea that you are and all of your value is in what you can do.
Mhm.
And this melds so perfectly with the work culture, the work, 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 the 12-hour, the 14-hour, the do you really need to sleep,
Yep.
kind of. And then even when you're working for yourself, like the writing, like come on, like any of us are paying the bills with our books. And so we're doing, the two jobs, the three jobs. And then it's like, got to get that writing in. And it's just nonstop. It's like, I got the bucket of coffee right here. And and we glorify it. This is the right way to be. This is what's expected of you. And instead, I wanted to do the opposite. Is this so honorable and amazing? Is this our goal? What we really want, the pinnacle? And so Janie, one level, she is just laboring, 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 penalized for the slightest break, and she's sort of rolling with it, like, okay. And that's generally what we do. We roll, and we roll with all sorts of shit. And that was part of the, the digging of the shit. The we're just gonna do it, do it, do it. And then we also had just Genesis fairy tales. So love me a fairy tale, but also stories. And so again, if you're gonna go back to being sick, in my worst, I was not able to read. I was not able to Netflix and chill. These sorts of things weren't happening. Um, and uh, and yet I had Murderbot actually, and I just and I held on to that book, and I had the newest one at the time, and I wanted to read it, and so sometimes I'd read the first sentence, and I just read it over and over and because I couldn't remember it, or I couldn't.
Mhm.
And but just holding the book gave me a certain level of comfort because I found so much comfort in the stories. And then when I did get better, just a little bit better, enough to say read, there's all this horrible stuff that again I don't want to talk about, but like there's all of this
Uh-huh.
pain, all of this like hallucinations and shit. And stories just like save your life. Stories get us through the worst. And you're bearing through, and it doesn't matter what it is. And like, we need a break, we need something. And so I wanted that layer. And we've got the idea of the story as something that guides us. And I think it's true. We see all of these stories that are saying work, 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 meritocracy, and we believe it.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And we think, oh, that's going to, I can bust some ass and I will have the life that I want. I'll have achievements that I want. Sorry, that's your fairy tale. And then we also, with, say, fairy tales, you've got the expectations. I love a juxtaposition. I love a misunderstanding. So a lot of people go into a fairy tale and what they're expecting, or they hear the word fairy tale and they think Disney. They think princesses and we're going to sing with the forest animals and a prince is going to save us.
Mhm.
And so I wanted Janie showing up where everyone's like, oh yeah, we hear we got this battered woman. She's leaving. She's running away out into the woods. She's, oh, woe's me because she had this Prince Charming story in her head. And then that also leads into the victim blaming. Um, all her fault for believing all those stupid stories. When this is a misunderstanding because Janie was ready to kill that man.
Mhm.
Mhm.
The plan was there. Like, she was never the sheep you thought she was. Tricked reader, if I tricked you. And
Literally
and
a wolf in sheep's clothing at one point in the story, no less.
Yeah,
we I was working it hard.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
but I wanted that and I also found that, in real life because I like fairy tales and people I would be saying like, "Oh, it's like a fairy tale." And they'd be thinking, I don't know, some sort of wedding thing and I would be thinking like a horror show, like Bluebeard. And and that's what I wanted here. I wanted the idea of a contrast between two different realities, a contrast between two different lessons, expectations. And so we're learning from stories, she's learning from stories, she's using stories, all happening in this kind of labor manifesto, in this sort of burn it all down and eat them. Um, yeah.
I
Yeah.
think it's, I definitely think there's an element because we have the Disney version of fairy tales, which are meant to be so fun and friendly and oriented. But then if you actually read the original fairy tale it's from, they are bleak and they are dark. And it's an interesting juxtaposition they've created. And my mind is processing everything you just said because yeah, I'm very much seeing. I can be a little bit of a literal reader at times. So I'm very much looking back and thinking about all those instances in the story. And yeah, it's very well done in that regard. Very well done.
Well, whilst Ryan is a very literal reader, these sunglasses allow me to pick up raw thematics from whatever I'm reading, which is why I wear them, obviously. Uh, but when I started reading it, I saw the fairy tale parallels, and I'm really glad you brought that up because I'd made a note that said it's Hansel and Gretel, like just the darkest version possible. and it's way way darker than Hansel and Gretel. But I was like, they've baited her here to eat her. That they're going to put her in the oven and everything.
Well, Hansel and Gretel's is quite dark, but still, it's the
It is pretty
promised,
dark. Yeah,
very, very much so. It's the promised, even though this wasn't, the candy house, it was the retreat, it was the
yeah,
safe place, which again, back to the Genesis thing, people's idea, this was something else that came in, was the sheep farms. And so many writers, especially, I would hear writers just as a sort of regularly repeated joke, like, I'm just going to throw in my hat, I'm going to go off and raise sheep, I'm going to go be a sheep farmer. And it's like, this isn't the idyllic, bucolic.
And and
yeah.
that's something I wanted to touch on just because like spending time living in the UK and being from the Pacific Northwest myself, the setting was interesting just because I think a lot of people, at least like East Coast, and apologize for my generalism here, but a lot of East Coast environments you have between the big cities, you have a lot of small cities. Whereas in the Northwest, between small cities and between medium-sized cities, you have nothing. Like that idea of even if you leave the farm, there is nowhere to go for tens or 30, 50, 100 miles. Like you're out in the middle of nowhere. And that sense of isolationism was really, really well done throughout the story.
Thank you.
I also thought another parallel. So I'm a personal trainer. I work in a gym. That's like my day job. So very familiar with how I really appreciated as well. That was another that is how that works thing where she's building up her muscle. She's like, yeah, it's micro tears and the fibers and everything. And I was like, yeah, that's it. That's how it works. Get your protein in, girl. But then
She was.
the thought hit me while I was writing this note down, and I went, hold on. The muscles, what you eat, are they literally like building her up so that she's better to eat later? Was that on purpose?
This this was all this was all on purpose. Sorry.
Yes.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
I've got a little game that I always play with the authors called Was It Deliberate? I've got a
Oh.
bunch of them in here. But I felt so much of this was deliberate. And that's one of the things that I really loved about it. I love deliberate writing, especially when it comes to like theme and everything. I also wanted to note down that this is the first book I've read in quite some time where it didn't bother me that the dog died,
Had its moments.
which is
Not a
something.
lovable dog.
No, no,
Well,
not
that I
no.
think that goes throughout the entirety of the characters. Like you grow a fondness for Janie, and there
Howard
was
as
a
well.
there was a weird kind of moment with him, with Howard, but then like Rob is just a terrible, terrible person. Um, so it was interesting to see because Howard has his moments where like he is doing terrible things, but he doesn't feel innately like a terrible person. He's just been manipulated to the ends of the earth. So it was interesting to see that because like here we are talking about like the dogs weren't lovable, and I didn't feel that bad when Howard died. Like
I loved it.
like I didn't
Love
I
the
didn't
coyote
feel
hat coming in.
yeah, I didn't feel any remorse for them at all. Like even when the issue with Janie's ex-husband and his partner and everything like that, like yeah, like let him go. I'm like the world's not missing out.
Right. So when it comes to the guys like Eric, who is the husband, so kind of a minor character actually, and that was how I wrote him. Even though you could say that he started this all, um, I wanted very much that the story is not about him. And one thing that I did consider, I did step back a bit on, is if we're going to talk about domestic violence and make this a theme, one thing that I dislike is how much stories will tend to make just the vilest, blackest villain, because only then can we say, yep, that man should go down. I would have liked to explored more of a gray territory. Um, but since he wasn't, I didn't want it to be about him. one thing that I did was just make him the blackest villain. Uh, I meant black in a more symbolic way. And
I got you.
and so like every word out of his mouth, everything we know about him is vile. And that way he can show up and die, and we're all, applauding.
Yeah, we're rooting
There,
for it.
there would be
Exactly.
no,
Yeah.
you're not supposed to do that reaction to Janie, and even maybe more so with his backup, because his partner
Alejandro.
had even less time on page, so he needed to be
Mhm.
villain really fast. Because what I wanted was that cathartic, excellent feeling of the bastard had it coming. I wanted the reader to feel happy at these deaths, which
Yep.
is kind of interesting because I wanted so much realism in the book, steeped in realism, and yet to still get everyone on board with serial killing, I guess.
Yeah.
Well,
I
there,
was
there,
totally up for at the end, like Janie putting on the big sheepskin, getting the hatchet, and just going into the forest to just live as a wild woman or something. I was like, that would be perfect. Maybe she's like the villain in the next book or something. But I really loved it. It felt like she was reclaiming herself most of the way through the book. Like I wrote down in my notes that I feel like she started building strength long before she left in the first place. She was building herself up to do it. She was getting ready for a confrontation. Like this was just the result of a path that she put herself on a long time ago to get out of the situation she was in. The part especially where she's talking about like becoming a coyote, like identifying with them. She's talking about being predator and prey, and she kept saying like that's prey behavior. I'm not going to behave like prey. I loved that. It felt like a transformation, but it wasn't like she started one thing and became another. She was already on the way when we first meet her. She's already taken those first steps on her own.
well, and I was just gonna say,
No, on you go. Let
I
me
just want to
recharge.
add, at no point was there any attempt to kind of change who people are. Like Janie's constantly in this metamorphosis, for lack of a better word, but she's not trying to change Eric. Eric is a created character. That is who he is, and there is no change in that. Same with Rob. There's moments where you see her try to play Howard one way or another because he seems like the wild card in all of this. But ultimately, like she knows where Eric stands, she knows where Alejandro stands, she knows where Rob stands. So it was interesting to kind of see herself try to weave between all of that while still changing herself.
There's also a I think this is the last like serious thing that I'll ask you, and then I've got a bunch of like quick fire ones because I'm aware that the time's ticking down, and I don't think I'm going to have time to dive into everything the way that I'd love to. But the so you talked about the themes obviously of like ableism, and there's a lot of sexism and stuff in there as well. It's a woman's perspective on, and the book is just full of absolutely horrible men.
And Rob.
What made you choose to make Rob a woman?
Right. The stuff you were saying, basically.
Yeah.
So it's if we're talking sexism,
Mm-hmm.
one thing, my books are full of women villains.
Mm-hmm.
Spoiler. Uh, I we can be the villain too.
Mm-hmm.
There's that,
Rob's great.
absolutely. And I wanted to play, I was definitely working back to the juxtapositions and expectations and all of that. So she shows up and there's Rob, who is a hard ass from the beginning. And then there is Howard, which I call Howard and Harold interchangeably. Like I totally admit it right now, and I'm the one who wrote the guy. Um, So, and he's silent. He will not say a word. And he's introduced, like before we even meet him, like he's mad, don't pay attention to him. And so this was again me playing with you, the reader, because if you follow the general expectations, what we've been perhaps socialized to expect, then you're going to make the assumption that Howard is silently in charge somehow in the patriarchal position, and his silence is a punishment, and his anger is a punishment, and them arguing is a sign of bad things that are going to happen. Oh no, dad's mad.
Mm-hmm.
But you got it all wrong. Um, and then playing in that same way. So like I just loved the break at part two, and finally
Yeah,
you have him speak for the first time. And
yeah.
and it's like, wait, what? And that was fun to write too, to have him just silent for the book, and then to be just a total chatterbox on a,
Hmm.
like Shakespeare, this Shakespeare nut, which was just another layer of stories and how we learn from stories, bringing in Shakespeare with the fairy tales. But he he was really fun to write. He was really fun to write. And he was always in the kitchen. And this is another, if you're going to say gender stereotype of putting the woman in
Yeah,
the kitchen or trapping the woman in the kitchen. He was literally trapped. But also, if you're talking about farms and farming, one of the things that people like to brush over is how very much time it takes to get something from the field to the table, the enormous amount of prep time, the enormous amount of time um, to preserve or package or whatever. You need someone on that. That's a full-time job. So there he was.
I suspect that I may have been the perfect audience to point out the accuracies and stuff. I grew up like in the wilderness, basically. We hunted when I was young and stuff. My grandfather was a butcher. He used to butcher the things that would bring home.
Nice.
And it's messy, messy, really difficult, tough labor, man, like pulling something apart. And there's a lot goes into it and stuff. I really loved all those little details and stuff. I know they come from experience and stuff, obviously. And now I want to get into like
Wait,
the weird stuff.
I got one.
Brian, you
I
go
got
first
one
before I
one
kick off.
thing. We just hit the 10 minute, so we got 10 minutes left. But with Rob in particular, and I wanted to ask because it felt like it kind of shifted within Janie, because there's always like you said, Rob's a hard ass. There's always those hard asses in your life that you want to work hard for. Like you have those types of people who, whether they be professors, whether they be bosses, this or that, like they're hard asses because at the end of the day, it actually does bring the best out of you, and they're doing it in a very different way than how Rob is doing it. So it was interesting to see because, at least from my perspective, it felt like Janie went into it thinking, "Oh, she just wants the best out of me," blah blah blah, and then it shifted. Is
Well,
that
Janie is always saying, like, in her mind, we're with her, and she's like, "This is
Mhm.
reasonable. This is reasonable." That was one of those like constant fallbacks, and that was often her response to Rob pushing. But then she'd come from a lifetime of pushing, of being pushed.
Yeah.
And then changing herself and trying to make herself into
Yeah.
what her husband wanted her to be, trying
Mm-hmm.
to accommodate and stuff. I love
Mm-hmm.
that tension
Becoming the
the whole way
pinnacle.
through it. Yeah. And then obviously, like, I wish we had time to touch on the parallels between, like rearing animals for their bodies, for what they're capable, for what they can do for you, and how society treats women, and
Mm-hmm.
how everything's inverted, how the police are a danger, they're coming to kill you. The animals aren't your friends either, particularly. I haven't even spoken about Kisa the cat, which I'd love to, but she was the real MVP. But since we've only got, 8 minutes left, I'm going to start rattling off some weird ones, right? So,
All right, all right.
firstly, I wrote this down as soon as I finished. I went, I have to ask Shannon, what's the weirdest thing you've eaten?
I the problem the problem with weird is it's so cultural. So if you want to talk about
Mhm.
hunting, I've eaten squirrel.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
Not phased. How
but
did you find it?
just from like travel and stuff, sea snails, shark. I've eat squid ink, really like that.
Oh,
Uh,
I've not tried squid ink. Yeah, that's an
oh,
interesting one.
delicious, so sweet. So if I may recommend a risotto al nero, it's just a beautiful Venetian dish.
I didn't expect to get like dinner recommendations after reading
Uh,
Domestication.
didn't you? I actually thought about, instead of the letter, I was like, should I? I could put a recipe.
Recipe, yeah.
Yeah. Oh
I held back. I
man.
held back from a nice sheep recipe for you all.
A recipe for Vinay.
Yeah, Vinay's spice mix or
Seems
something.
a
Yeah, we could have went for that.
bad
Would have been
taste.
great. Right, so that's number one. Let me see what number two is. I'm just going down my quick list here. what I have to get in. I've just written at one point, oh God, the acid. Like, how much fun did you have coming up with the absolutely horrifying deaths that everyone goes through?
You got to make it interesting. You got to make it interesting. I
Yeah.
mean, we want to kill them, but we can't kill them in the same way. I can't kill them in the ways I've killed other people in other books. I mean, this is just the plight of the author, right? But then I had, if you were talking about the parallels, here we had the ability to do all of the same things to the humans that are done to the animals,
Yeah.
and that was a bit too much to resist.
Is
Yeah,
it the
that
part where they're talking about how to the animals they're just meat? You know, there's your ex-husband. He's just meat now. He's just
Mhm.
meat. I love
that
that.
that
Loved
kind
it. I love
of
it. I love when we get existential.
Yeah, that layering throughout and the comparison throughout was just it's really eye-opening. I think this is certainly one of the books where you read and you really get something out of it in terms of, yeah, it's a fiction novel, thank God, but there's also
Easy.
there's also very real elements of truth to it, very real societal topics, and I think
I think so too. I think that also you can consider, vegetarianism, and you can bring in
Mhm.
a lot of these ideas linked to it. All right, hit me if you got more.
Okay. Why Anastasia and Dolly Parton? I love Anastasia, man.
Well, I was like, what is Rob going to listen to? That was kind of the catch. And then it was like, would it be Rob or would it just be random other farmhands? Um, Dolly Parton. Okay, so I decided to go country. And if you go country, the country women and the men are singing very different things. And this is just another
Mhm.
little sort of flag that I put in there, since the women are full of killing the men who have betrayed them. Just, if you happen not to listen to country music or have never.
Yeah.
And the Dolly Parton songs, she had like the 9 to 5, which was about
Yep.
that work culture and being overworked. And then there was a film back
Jolene,
in the 80s
obviously.
that you may or may not know, um,
Mhm.
about these ladies who take down their boss, and it's just another link. But we had a name for the sheep. Initially, actually, that sheep was Annabelle Lee with a Poe, the stars
Right. Yeah.
I see
Yeah.
the bright eyes of beautiful Annabelle Lee. But Annabelle Lee just does not roll off the tongue. And so as I was writing it, and it kept coming up as like too many syllables. So that's when I pulled in Jolene, which I thought was nice for an anthem, side anthem with the farm, and the appearances, expectations of women linked in with the parallel that Janie was feeling with the sheep.
Yeah. Yeah, it
yeah,
was steeped in
great
that kind of
song.
stuff. I felt like every reference was a deeper reference than I was picking up initially. I had to think about
Oh.
it a bit.
Well, it is just really nice to hear that all of these things were actually intentional and deliberate. And it sounds
Okay.
like you have the whiteboard of all whiteboards and all just like pins everywhere connecting all the dots, because it is really, really cool to see how much really went into this story. It isn't just woman ends up on sheep farm running away from the world. It is very much
Yeah.
like it's so deliberate and intentional. And it's really
It
cool.
goes deep, man. It goes deep.
That's
Right, I've
cool.
got two
Right
quick
down to
yes
the
or no ones,
bone.
right? Yeah, to the bone, literally.
Yep.
Okay, quick ones then, because we're running down the timer. When Rob says, or I think she tells Howard, and Howard passes it on to Janie, says, no, she says you're pack now. That could mean she's part of the pack, or it could mean she's basically as good as dead. She's going in with the pack where the other bones are. Was that deliberate?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, and the last one is I've just written the words Chekhov's wood chipper. Nobody went in the wood chipper. Why did nobody go in the wood
Oh
chipper?
yeah, I was waiting
Bones
for
went in the
that.
wood chipper because I told you this already. Like, you just cannot kill people in the ways that they expect to be, like, that's too obvious. But yeah, the wood chipper was there.
You're
I
right.
needed, but the bones did hit the wood chipper. Something went in the wood chipper.
Very true.
So
Very true. As
now,
soon as the wood chipper came out, I went, "Oh, who's going in there?"
yeah, yeah. It felt like, I don't know if you guys seen The Quiet Place where they have the moment where like they keep stepping around
Oh yeah.
around the nail, around the nail, and then eventually they hit it. That's how I felt the wood chipper was. Um, but
There
we
were
have
weapons everywhere.
There really were, especially on a farm. So we have a minute 45 seconds left, and I want to ask if people, and for those who did like domestication and they want to read more of your work, what would you recommend they read next, and what's the best place that they can find you?
So shannonnight.net, that's my website. All the stuff's there. I got a monthly newsletter there if you want to sign up. The next one I would say suggest Grave Cold. Um, Grave Cold is future sci-fi Portland. The dead are being used as an energy source.
Already
So
sold.
I'm sold.
get yours now, and I'm busy turning it into a trilogy. Second book's done, not published. Third book's half written, and it's going to be amazing. It's going to outer space. It'll be wild. It will go where you don't expect it to go. So,
That's very cool. Well, thank you. That, oh God, I feel like I learned so much from this. It's really highlighted everything. It's really emphasized everything. We're really grateful that you took the time to be with us. Just
well,
thank
thank you so much for reaching out to me and inviting me into to be part of your paper quest.
We
And
can
we'll
just disturb some of our subscribers with
oh
absolute horrifying stuff.
yeah.
Hopefully, in just the kindest way.
I'm gonna get some emails later.
Yeah.
I can only guarantee it. But for those of you that made it the entire interview, the story was Domestication by Shannon Knight. Thank you all so much for being here, and we'll speak to everyone soon. Take care, guys.
Real pleasure. See you later.
Bye.